stadium, and it's packed with his fans, with his cabinet members, some senators, some representatives, even some members of the Supreme Court. He holds up the Constitution and he tears it and drops the pieces on the stage. Everyone in the stadium stands and cheers. Now we can say that's a metaphor for the attacks that we have been seeing against our Constitution for the past 5 months, possibly more. And it's frightening. The question is, what's it going to be like in the future? What are we going to be seeing 5 months from now? Is there something that we as citizens can do to make sure that we're not seeing that on national TV in the future?
Well, on that note, Karen, boy, start off with a real downer. I I appreciate that you and Jim made this happen, and I'm honored to moderate this panel. We've got a great panel. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to give a little bio of each panelist. I'm gonna go alphabetically, and then I'm gonna ask them the first question. So I'm just gonna go right into it. But first, we're gonna start with Amit Agarwal, someone I know because he was at least a Floridian. He's a national guy now. But Amit and I go way back because when I was state attorney in Palm Beach County, we had a very high profile case that we eventually lost on appeal. Some of you may remember it, the Robert Kraft case. You can look it up yourself. But Amit Agarwal took the case on appeal at the Attorney General's office, and he did such a masterful job that it wasn't his fault we ended up losing, but he did as well as he could. A brilliant orator, and is someone who I would hire any day to represent me in the future. So Amit Agarwal is special counsel at Project Democracy. He served as Solicitor General of Florida from 2016 to 2021. He was a law clerk to Justice Samuel A. Alito on the U.S. Supreme Court and to then Judge Brett Kavanaugh on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. He received his BA from Duke University, as a JD from Georgetown University. So I want to ask you, Amit, you're talking about one justice who was appointed by President Trump the first time around, and Brett Kavanaugh, who has occasionally departed from the rest of the Supreme Court, the conservative wing of the Supreme Court, the MAGA wing. But mostly he falls in line. Then you have Sam Alito, Justice Alito is as conservative as they come. It seems like he and Justice Thomas are the two most loyal votes for the right wing. I want to know your level of discomfort with the Supreme Court and whether you believe that because the legislature, the legislative branch, the Congress has pretty much emasculated itself, whether there's some hope that the way the courts have acted lately is a guardrail for democracy. So if you could just take the question and then we'll move on to Amanda.
Yeah, sure. First, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be a part of this program. And Dave, really happy to be reconnected with you and to be part of this conversation. And so, on the Supreme Court, I don't really think it's about the individual justices or the personalities. I felt incredibly honored and privileged to be able to work for Justice Alito and for then Judge Kavanaugh. And to answer your question directly, I think reasonable people can disagree about all kinds of things, including a lot of the tough questions that come before the Supreme Court. But I personally have a high degree of confidence in the professionalism and the integrity of the federal judiciary as a whole, and including the Supreme Court. And I think the Supreme Court is an indispensable institution in American life, and that it's okay to disagree with particular decisions, but that it's incumbent on all of us to do what we can to defend our independent judiciary. And that can coexist with criticism of particular court decisions. But I think the independent judiciary has been functioning at a very high level of professionalism and integrity.
Well, now, Amanda Carpenter, would you agree that the courts have been functioning with integrity? Because they're the only thing we have left. We have three branches of government, and the Congress, the legislative branch, has decided to step away and not provide checks and balances. So the only guardrails we have left are the courts. Would you be as sanguine as Amit about the courts and the Supreme Court in particular? And before you answer that, I just want to tell people a little bit about Amanda. You may have seen her on lots of cable shows. I'm very familiar with her because she's on TV a lot. She's quite in demand. She's a writer and editor at Project Democracy. Her work involves collaborating with Project Democracy advocates and experts to promote the organization's mission, ideas, and key priorities. She also worked on Capitol Hill as Senator Ted Cruz's communications director in South Carolina, Senator Jim Demint's speechwriter. She brings over 15 years of political and media experience with her to Project Democracy. Amanda, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and also to work with Amit. We are Protect Democracy. Don't worry, everybody makes that mistake. And I do want to make a plug while you are listening to us. We do have a free newsletter that we use to communicate a lot of great legal and Hill analysis. It's called If You Can Keep It. It is free. I promise you will hear from a lot people who are a lot more wise and smarter than me, like Amit and a lot of our great staff. So I do hope you sign up for that. But as for the question, are the courts holding? I mean, yeah, I think to the degree that they can right now, but I don't think we should say everything is fine, because the repeated sustained attacks on that judiciary from the president and a lot of the MAGA movement is very concerning, right? Like, there is constant talk. Like, the biggest thing happening right now is the movement to really prevent lower courts from issuing TROs and things that can stop unlawful actions. And I think that movement is real. There are advocates for it in Congress, and they're talking about doing a lot of radical things, like remaking some of the federal court system with the tools that they do have in Congress. And I also think about, the really vicious attacks on Amy Coney Barrett, who has issued, I think, a lot of very nuanced, strong legal opinions, all because she had the audacity to depart from the sort of doctrine that's coming from the bench and other places. And so while I am glad that the courts are holding, that we do have recourse through them, it's a difficult process. I mean, looking to the courts to resolve everything, it takes a long time. And those resolutions, when they do come, and they are kind of few and far between, aren't entirely satisfying, right? Because we do know that Supreme Court, like a lot of them, I think we can be sophisticated enough to admit they are political actors, right? Like, they're trying to draw lines, not anger the president, not anger Congress. And so as we get into more complex scenarios, and the one that I am really, really focused on right now from a rule of law perspective is the president's deployment of the military and domestic grounds, complicated by the fact that, there's operations in Iran that have a lot of complications as well. And so, when it comes down to it, yeah, we have the courts, but really the one thing that makes us a democracy is that the president doesn't have direct control of the military. And I do worry that we are seeing him consolidate that power and use the military as a tool for personal power to advance his agenda without any of the normal checks and balances. And so, I worry about those scenarios and where the courts will come down on those questions, because I do think it is inevitable.
Well, let's talk about the rule of law. You invoked the rule of law, and we have with us the executive director for the Society for the Rule of Law. So who better than to come next? Gregg Nunziata. He's an attorney, public policy professional, and veteran of the conservative legal movement, served as chief nominations counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee, played a strategic role in the confirmation proceedings for scores of federal judges and executive branch appointees. And he has a long list. I mean, he was an advisor to Senator Marco Rubio. He served in the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division and worked as a litigator in an international law firm. So based on what you just heard from Amanda, she talked about the concern about the military and the National Guard on our streets. And yet the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, a 3-judge panel, Greg, where they had 2 judges appointed by President Trump and 1 judge appointed by President Biden, all agreed that we're going to defer to the president and let him pretty much Bigfoot the governor in federalizing the National Guard. Does that concern you as a conservative? I mean, if this goes on like that and you give unlimited deference to the president, isn't that Katie bar the door? So what are you as concerned as Amanda and I are about this?
Thank you. It's good to be here. I appreciate that. I think we all of us probably share some overlapping concerns. Uh, I do want to, I guess, echo my two co-panelists on the judiciary. I think we do have a really high-performing judiciary. Maybe I would think that. I spent most of my career working to confirm a lot of conservative judges, but I really think critics on the left get it wrong when they think that our judiciary, our Republican appointed judiciary, is partisan or loyal to the president. That's not been the case. I think that judges left and right both mostly take their jobs seriously, and our independent judiciary is a real kind of crown jewel of our constitutional system. It is the one branch of government that's really operating how it's supposed to these days. There are going to be decisions we disagree with. Some I disagree with strongly, but I think all those judges are really trying to do their job and do it well. And that's why we do have this concerted attack on the authority and the legitimacy of the judiciary from the president, Stephen Miller, J.D. Vance. The way they talk about judges is not just that they're wrong. They call them communists and saboteurs. They try to delegitimize the entire judicial branch. There are threats of impeachment for opinions that the president doesn't like. There are wanted posters in the House of Representatives for judges who have ruled against Trump. And it's a really, really dangerous situation for lots of ways. It's an attempt, I think, to intimidate judges. It puts judges at physical risk. It's also perhaps preparing the ground for the president to feel like he can disregard court orders, which could be a real crisis in our system. I'll say just a little bit about the military and the use of the military domestically. I'm also very concerned about that for a lot of reasons. Just one step back. I run a group called the Society for the Rule of Law. We are mostly conservatives and mostly lawyers who are concerned about these issues, and we engage in this in a couple of ways. We do academic programming and we do some advocacy. On the academic programming, we do regular webinars, so you could find us online. We just did one this week on domestic deployment of the military with a bunch of conservatives, veterans, talking about how and why this is dangerous, and both kind of the legal issues and just sort of values of who we are as Americans and what the military is for. So there's lots of reasons to be worried. The legal framework, I think, is complicated. The president does have a fair amount of authority, and there are conditions for the president to use the military domestically that, as written in the law, are pretty easily satisfied by a president who wants to take advantage of them. One of the problems we have, and one of the real challenges we have, particularly as lawyers and looking at some of these problems, is the law can't answer everything. And a lot of our laws and a lot of our case laws, the Supreme Court precedent, presume a good faith actor, presume a president who takes seriously his obligations to the Constitution and his oath. And it leaves pretty large running room for a president that wants to abuse his powers, especially in an environment where the public tolerates it or Congress tolerates it, which we may be in. And so I'm worried about that, and I think that I'm not sure that the courts can save us. I do think perhaps it's time for the courts to think more deeply about that presumption that we have a good faith actor in the Oval Office. I think that presumption is something that exists with some of the conservative judges, and it's not about serving the president, not about loyalty to Trump. I don't think it's about a belief that we need to have a strong executive, and they're afraid to put shackles on an executive. You saw that in the immunity case last year, which I thought was deeply, deeply wrong. But I think that was the real fear that was animating the Republican appointed justices, that too many shackles on an executive would have all these downsides if we couldn't. If the executive wasn't able to respond to a real crisis when it comes. Again, the problem is that we can't have faith in the person in that office, and I'm not sure that we can these days.
If I can just ask a question,
Please.
On that point about whether, Trump is acting in good faith, and I think there's obviously questions around that. But to me, what Trump has been exceptional at in his second term, and I don't mean that in a flattering way necessarily, is that he has found what vague powers exist for the executive and exploited them to the maximal degree, whether that be pardons in the form of, mass pardons for January 6 rioters, including the convicted seditionist, whether that's like, can we deploy troops to the streets because there's an invasion based on an outdated law, and somehow, people haven't been able to question that because we do have these outdated laws on the books and powers that a president has never used like this before.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious about your guys' thoughts on that.
Amit, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, totally agree.
What she said.
We need to write better laws.
Yeah, no, and it is a challenge because there are situations where the president does something that I think might be bad or corrosive to the rule of law that might undermine constitutional values, but is probably legal or probably constitutional. And sometimes it's hard for maybe even especially lawyers to realize that there's that category of actions that might be technically by the books, but are still deeply, deeply toxic and destructive. The pardons is a great example. The president has broad leeway to pardon folks, and using pardons the way he has is to reward criminals who acted on his behalf is deeply corrosive to the rule of law and to the equal protection of laws.
I want to get back to something you had said, Greg, that perhaps the judiciary is giving too much deference to a president who's not acting in good faith. And I think, didn't Chief Justice Roberts sort of recognize this? Isn't that a game changer? Because after the Supreme Court ordered the federal government to facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia, the Justice Department and the United States, the Trump administration said, we'll facilitate it. Sure. If El Salvador releases him, we'll send a plane to pick him up. And Chief Justice Roberts like, that's not what we meant. And that's why he came back with that extraordinary 2 a.m. ruling that put the kibosh on all the deportations that were similar to Abrego Garcia's. And so that's why I'm wondering if the Supreme Court has now changed its tone a little bit. We'll see, I guess, tomorrow with all the rulings that come out. But it does seem like Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett are a lot more skeptical of the president than before. It looks like they may not be giving him the benefit of the doubt anymore. Would you agree with that?
I would. I think that's right. And maybe I want to bring up something else because it's in the news this week and I've been active on it. The president has been clear over the last few weeks that he regrets a lot of his judicial nominations because he nominated traditional conservatives, the kind of people that I would have recommended to my old boss, Senator Rubio, were he president, or that Amanda might have recommended to a President Ted Cruz, or that somebody might have recommended to a President Jeb Bush. I mean, these were just normal conservative lawyers who, yes, had a conservative jurisprudence, but took the rule of law and the Constitution seriously. Trump listened to the recommendations of kind of my people and our legal community last term, largely, not entirely, but largely. And he regrets it because they're ruling against him, because these Republican appointed judges, Trump appointed judges are ruling against him. And he's indicating he doesn't want to do that anymore. So he said publicly that he regrets taking the advice of the Federal Society and related people.
Oh, he called Leonard Leo a sleazebag.
And somebody who hates America.
Yeah, I'm sure you know Leonard Leo. All you guys probably do, right? Is he a sleazebag?
I would not call him a sleazebag.
I'm baiting you.
I've been to mass with Leonard, but so but at the same time doing this, he nominated this guy named Emile Beauvais from the DOJ to the Third Circuit, which is my home circuit based in Philadelphia, Court of Appeals, and Beauvais has been the tip of the spear in Trump's effort to corrupt the Justice Department, to punish his enemies and reward his friends. I mean, he's been deeply involved in this effort, and it's a really concerning nomination. It's not a nomination that would have come up normally through the conservative legal world. He's got no relationship with that, no commitment to principled conservative jurisprudence. He's distinguished primarily by a fierce devotion to Donald Trump and his ends. He had his Judiciary Committee hearing this week. It was quite explosive, but people ought to call their senators about this because if Trump is allowed to start, fortunately for us, it takes a long time to reshape the federal judiciary. But if he's allowed to turn the Republican Party away from nominating principled jurists to nominating partisan hacks, that's going to be a real real deep damage to our system and to our future. So it's
Amanda, you got some?
Yeah, I mean, Greg, you mentioned earlier, Trump may get in a situation where he defies court orders, but, I'm just curious, the take from this group, but it seems the pattern has been thus far and will probably continue. He will defy court orders while saying he is complying, because I actually think at this moment, and that can change, he doesn't actually want to be seen as defying the courts. And that's why you see this entire movement happening in Capitol Hill to reshape the judiciary so they have people who say yes, right? Like he wants that stamp of approval from the courts. And so, I do think it's right to be very concerned and prepare for a situation where he does defy court orders, but I don't think that's how he wants it to be. If he can, look at the way that he stacked the Department of Justice, although there was some success in spiking Ed Martin as the DC Attorney General and having him in place of Jeanine Pirro. We can compare what's pros and cons of that situation. But
it can't get any worse than Ed Martin. It couldn't get any worse than Ed Martin. If you dress up like Hitler, generally you probably shouldn't be the U.S. attorney anywhere.
Yeah. But this is why the second administration came in so ready to go in purging people and installing loyalists to eliminate anyone who might say you're wrong. And I do think they are very focused on getting the court long-term in a position where they are also yes men and women.
Amit, I'd like you to weigh in because, you've been part of the conservative movement, and Trump did manage to really shift the judiciary. Look at the Ninth Circuit, which just ruled to allow Trump to federalize the National Guard. The Ninth Circuit used to be the most liberal circuit. Now, 10 of the 29 judges there were appointed by Trump, and it's really shifted. But now it looks like in his second term, he's moving away, as Greg said, from the Leonard Leo Federalist Society list and doesn't care about ideology anymore. It's all about loyalty. How do you see that playing out the next 3.5 years?
I think it's a watershed development in all kinds of ways, and not least in terms of the relationship between the current administration and the conservative legal movement. And that could have all kinds of implications going forward. I also think it's really, just for all the reasons that Greg set out, I think it's a real danger to the rule of law to have this potential transformation of the federal judiciary. To Greg's point, like, to make this concrete, I read about a study recently that said something to the effect that as of May, federal district court judges who had been appointed by Republican presidents were ruling against the Trump administration at a rate of something like 72% of the time, whereas Democratic appointed federal district court judges were ruling against him at a rate of about 80% of the time. So a relatively small difference there. And I think that just goes to the point that our independent judiciary is doing what we expect them to do. They're trying to get the law right. They're trying to get the facts right. And regardless of who appoints them, at this point in time, they're substantially coming to the same conclusions. And obviously there's going to be some range of disagreement, and some range of honorable disagreement is a good thing. But we don't see we see, I think, a federal judiciary functioning as it's supposed to function. And that could change if you have, if you take the standards that have informed the selection of judicial nominees, and instead of trying to find people who have a demonstrated record of integrity and excellence, and you just try to appoint loyalists. So I think that's a real danger.
So based on everything we've said so far, how concerned are you for our democracy, our Constitution, and the rule of law? I want to go to each of you and ask you to give it from 1 to 10, where 10 is the most concerned and 1 not at all concerned. Based on everything we've said, based on everything we've seen, what is your level of concern? We'll start with you, Amanda.
I don't know if I'm the right person to ask. I think given that I have worked in this space and given, my entire job to work to protect democracy, because I do think this is an all-out effort, like, I'm at a 10 while also realizing, like, it's not the end of the world, but, like, all the things, people who have studied how authoritarians gain power and entrench power and stay in power for the long term have identified the signals. And Trump is following a framework that has been clearly used by other kinds of authoritarians for a long time. And it looks different because we are in America, but I mean, I don't think you can look at what happened on January 6th. Okay, so Karen opened up the discussion with a metaphor of Donald Trump standing at a stadium and ripping up the Constitution. I don't know if that's so much of a metaphor. Donald Trump called for the termination of the Constitution after the 2020 election because he wanted to rerun the results. That's when he was talking about using the military, having talks with people to seize voting machines to rerun the election. If you don't have elections that are free and fair and rightly decided, you don't have a democracy. You know, that is not a hysterical comment to make. That is just a plain statement. If the military determines elections, we do not live in a democracy. That is not happening at that point. You talk about the courts. The court said again and again and again, all through November and December, Republican judges, Democratic governors, there's no fraud in the election. There's no fraud in the election. They had their day and day and day and day in court, right? And then in December, that's when they started thinking about these other theoretical actions. It didn't come to happen because people said no, right? You had people like Bill Barr, their attorney general, saying, I'm not going to say there was fraud. People said no. And then still they continued with insisting these lies and convinced people to storm the Capitol and attack police officers. And so, like, you know, what do you do with that information? I'm at a 10 because I feel like that can't happen again. And I don't mean to alarm anyone, but this is what I'm spending my entire life doing. This is my job. This is my livelihood. Okay. So not everybody should be me. But they continue to talk about these things. And when I talk about Trump using the military as a personal tool, you know, deploying troops to the streets over the opposition of a governor, a mayor, of elected officials in that state. You have the DHS Secretary Kristi Noem saying that we're here to liberate you from socialist leadership. I mean, what would you call that in another country? I mean, it kind of sounds like a military coup. You have ICE, which I'm for immigration enforcement, running around completely unaccountable, wearing masks, seizing people off the streets without presenting warrant and not giving people due process. What do you call that? What do we call that? And so I'm not trying to alarm anybody, but these are just the facts of what is happening right now, today, in the headline. Like, read the headlines. This is not, you know, this is the real world scenario that we're in now. So I think it's all hands on deck.
All right, Greg, we heard from Amanda. She gave it a 10, and she used the 4-letter word of a coup. Would you agree? And would you call it a coup?
Wow.
Well, you
I
can
was gonna
feel free
start
to
with
talk me down, Greg. I'm not going to put you in the situation.
no. I mean, look, I said somewhere publicly recently that I don't want to be an alarmist, but I'm rather alarmed, and I am rather alarmed. I mean, things are, yeah. If I had to put on a number, I guess I'd say 7 or something. But Amanda's right that all the indicators are there that we're going in a bad direction, and I see very little pushing back. You know, and I think about just over the course of the last decade, and I've been in DC most of that time. It's just amazing how we've gotten here. I mean, things that Republicans accept today or defend today, they would have sworn up and down 5 or 10 years ago that they would never stand for. And there's this amazing creeping normalization of kind of the autocratic tendencies of the president and his movement. It's really chilling to me. I mean, I never went along in 2016. Many of my friends did, but you would hear from people in Washington, Republicans, professional Republicans, that they shared all these kinds of concerns about Trump. But he was, binary system. He's our guy. We're going to make the most of it. But, guardrails won't go so far, make this successful. And every guardrail was breached. And those folks, 5-10 years later, after an attack on the Capitol, after an attempt to steal the election, are not only still supporting the president, they don't do it with reservations anymore. 8 years ago, they'd have to convince you why, how about how deeply concerned they were, and now they're all aboard. I mean, there's just been this, it's been seeping in to the right, and just more broadly, and that's really worrisome to me about how quickly we can drift. The other thing that is amazing to me is just the amount of fear that's out there, and you see it in the law firms, you see it in businesses, you see it in media. I see it all the time when I talk to people who I think could make a difference if they raise their voice, but they're afraid to, because of the impact it could have on their careers. And it's a government doesn't have to break legs or disappear people to cause fear. Government's very, very powerful. And when you have a government run by people who are willing to use it to benefit their friends and hurt their enemies, you just create this recipe for an authoritarian climate. And it's really, really unsettling. So yeah, I don't want to be an alarmist, but if you look at all these indicators, it's hard not to be deeply alarmed about the direction we're going in. And some things encourage me. The courts do encourage me. There's green shoots here or there, but not enough of them.
Would you use the C word to call it a coup?
No, not yet. Not yet.
All right.
Not yet, but but no, I mean, look, I think we have an administration that I don't think we've had presidents who have been immoral. We have presidents who have exerted really aggressive models or theories of executive power. I don't think we've ever had a president before that really just fundamentally doesn't believe the law is a meaningful constraint on his behavior. I mean, and he is enabled by an administration. He's staffed by lawyers who view it that way. It's a strange thing to explain to people, and this sounds really small, but it's really important. Typically, the executive branch is full of lawyers who try to help the president do things legally and tell the president, we can't do that because that's not legal. This term, there are many fewer of those lawyers in the administration. The administration is full of lawyers who believe it is their job to give the president what he wants. And this is in the people he's appointed and what he's done in the career ranks of lawyers, how he fired long-serving, say, JAG officers, the top lawyers in the military. I'm just systematically getting rid of these internal checks that kind of keep things between the guardrails that we expect culturally. And it's really, really destructive and very, very dangerous.
Thank you. And Amit, last one. 1 to 10, would you call it a coup?
Well, I want a clarification. I just want to say, I didn't say there's a coup happening. I said when just so we're clear, Kristi Noem talking about using federal agents to liberate Los Angeles from their elected officials sounds like a coup. I'm not saying the rhetoric is often inflammatory, but she is talking as if she wants to stage one. I am not saying there's one currently happening right now.
Fair enough. And I got to tell you, for me, we cross a Rubicon into a coup when the president says, I am disregarding all court orders. Let them enforce their orders. I'm ignoring them. That's the coup. But we haven't gone there yet. You guys were correct in saying that at least he's given lip service, saying, I will obey the Supreme Court. I will. He's very transactional, the president, and he doesn't want to upset Chief Justice Roberts any more than he has, because he needs Chief Justice Roberts more than Roberts needs him, in my eyes. But Amit, what do you think between us on a scale of 1 to 10, constitutional crisis, 1 to 10?
Yeah, so I don't know about constitutional crisis. I would say if the question is what is my level of concern?
Concern, yes, sir.
Yeah, I would agree with Amanda. I'm at a 10 also, and that's not to say that I'm pessimistic about our ability to collectively come together and to put a stop to this. Like we have a preponderance of power. I read a Winston Churchill speech the other day about this great speech about we have a preponderance of power on our side. It has but to be combined to be obeyed. That's where we are right now. I think there's a solid majority of the American people who believe in democracy and the rule of law. We just got to come together, and we can do this. But in terms of my level of concern about where we're headed right now, I am at a 10. Amanda and I are fortunate to work for an organization, Protect Democracy, that we have incredibly talented people who study what authoritarianism is all about. And they came up with this great resource called the Authoritarian Playbook, which I consult from time to time. And it identifies 7 tactics that historically have been employed by authoritarians. And if you look at those, it really seems like you can check off the box for every single one of them in terms of they are happening in some form right now. So measured by that standard, I would say I have a very high level of concern. At the same time, we can do this. And I think there's a solid majority of the American people on our side. We just have to wake up to the reality of what we're facing and roll up our sleeves and have every person do what they can to fight for American democracy and the rule of law.
Well, that's a great segue to my final question for the group before we take questions from the audience, who's been very patient and engaged. Amit, I'm going to start with you. Can you expound further on that? Because my final question was, what can we all do to help things? What can we do to make progress here?
Yeah, so our colleagues at Protect Democracy actually came up with a really valuable resource that has 29, believe it or not, 29 concrete things that every single one of us can do. You can start right now, and some of them will take 30 seconds to a minute, and some of them it's kind of like a lifelong commitment. But they divided these concrete suggestions into 3 or 4 buckets, including like one is how to be informed, how to get politically engaged, how to build communities. And then there was, I think, a bonus section as well. But it's for anyone who's looking to get involved and who's asking, what can I do? I would direct you to that resource. And I don't know if there's a chat option, but I could even put that link in the chat, or you could probably find it on the PD website. But there's all kinds of things that you can do. And my advice to people would be to say, one, find something that speaks to you and to your skills, to your talents, to your experience, and also something that you have a passion for. So if you're a lawyer, you can litigate cases. If you're a communicator, you can get out there writing and speaking. But there's something for everyone to do, and find something that speaks to you. And it doesn't have to be full time, because we have a lot of people we all have jobs and we have families that we need to take care of. I get concerned sometimes. I talk to people who are kind of like, they're having a hard time just holding it all together and maintaining their sanity in this time of turbulence. And it's so easy to just kind of do all the doom scrolling and try to wrap your head around just everything that's happening every single day. And my advice to people would be, don't do that. Find how much time you can dedicate to this cause, and then do it with a full heart. And that can be litigation, it can be writing, it can be advocacy, it can be community organization and mobilization, which I think is really one of the most important things that we can do right now and that we need to do. I don't think this fight is going to be won in the courts for the reasons that Gregg was talking about before. The courts are an indispensable resource and they have a really important role to play, but ultimately this is going to be decided by all of us as citizens, and we just have to come together and organize. So I think there's a lot of room for ordinary people to do that in whatever way speaks to them.
By the way, I totally agree. As a former prosecutor, don't expect prosecutors to save democracy. Don't expect judges to do it. It's going to be the people who do it. And you don't have to wait 4 years for the next election. The next major election is the midterms, and that could change things dramatically. If the president doesn't have control of the House and the Senate, then maybe we'll have some legislative pushback for once, maybe some checks and balances. So that could be a game changer. And you're right about the doom scrolling. I always have to remind myself, Twitter is not real life. And so, yeah, for your mental health sake, it's good to get off that stuff, at least every now and then. Amanda, what do you think? What are some good prescriptions to help save our democracy?
Well, I think there's a question people should consider, and doing it is harder than it sounds. Are you willing to be a member of a broad tent cross-ideological coalition? What does that mean? Are you willing to join in common cause? And I'm not saying like join a group, but like, are you sort of willing to tolerate people who you think sort of believe in the basic concept of rule of law, but you may not agree on anything else? Mm-hmm. This is really hard. I have a friend who was a hardcore, sort of never Trump Republican type, became that way after January 6th. He went to a No Kings meeting last night. He was thinking about running for some kind of office as a Democrat. It went terribly. It went awful. He went up there to give a pitch to saying, I'm ready to fight for this cause. People found some article about him, Bush war stuff, 2006, and essentially said, get out of here.
Ugh.
He said, maybe I'll try again in 10 years. It's sad, but like that is a more common experience than not. People giving, I don't even want to say giving up your partisan identity, although I do think people should do that. Being always Trump is not, being always anybody is not good, right? Politicians let you down. Like, you should be willing, you can be a Republican and maybe vote for a Democrat. once in a while. That doesn't, like, who cares? Who's keeping this kind of score? Like, we have this like intense politicization where your partisan identity is so core to you. And it's really destructive. But are you willing to be a part of some kind of coalition? You know, like the No Kings protests were a pretty big deal a couple weeks ago. There's a lot of stuff there that I am not on board for. Okay, a lot of funny flags, things like that. But generally, can I sign up to the idea of like, yeah, we're not a country of kings. July 4th was the original OG No Kings holiday, right? That's an easy one. But it's hard to be in those spaces sometimes. But that's really what it's going to require, because authoritarian regimes, you want to get back to what other people study, they seek to divide opposition coalitions. That is how they keep winning. They make that coalition fight each other instead of fighting the threat that's right in front of them. And so I think people should be thinking about that. And of course, like, you should always be willing to offer constructive criticism. But like when you're popping off online or whatever, are you doing it in the spirit of trying to make things better? Or are you trying to tear somebody down because you don't like how they're doing it? I think those are real world, like sort of everyday questions I think we can grapple with.
Yeah. These purity tests are going to be the demise of the political parties. And when you're in the minority, as the Democrats are, to have a purity test where you reject someone like your friend who wants to run, instead of saying, join us, instead of saying we're a big tent, to say, no, you're not part of it. And then your tent continues to shrink, and then you're a permanent minority. People would rather sometimes make a point than make a difference. I often think about Joe Manchin, who is a U.S. Senator from West Virginia, didn't always vote the Democratic Party. Most of the time he did, but he would infuriate progressives with his voting record. Well, he's gone now. And who do you have replacing him? Someone who votes with Trump 100% of the time. So, sometimes you can just be your own worst enemy. Gregg, what do you think? What's a good prescription for saving our democracy?
Thank you. These are hard questions, and because there's no easy answer. It's going to take a lot of work and a lot of over a long period of time. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I think it's important to just remind ourselves and our friends and our communities that democracy, ordered liberty, a republic is a fragile thing. It's a precious thing. And there's a deep complacency, I think, in America that we've had this for so long. Of course it'll survive. And I frequently hear that directly from some of my friends in conservative legal world. Trump's terrible, but the institutions will hold. This is America. It's been 250 years. We've taken a lot. And I just think that's such a wrong-headed way to think, certainly for a conservative who's supposed to be called to conserve what's best about his or her civilization. We're actively called to renew and refresh our institutions. Ronald Reagan famously said that freedom is only one generation away from extinction. And I think we all need to have that in our heads much more as we engage in the political space. I think, Amanda touched on this. There's a different kind of glance on this issue about strange coalitions. I think it's helpful to do some deep thinking about what is a threat to our democracy and our Constitution and what's just a policy you don't like, for lots of reasons. But if you want to build coalitions, being able to talk to folks about these deep threats to our system that we should all be concerned about, and not lumping it in with your preferred minimum wage or whatever your policy issue is. It's really important. I mean, to be able to do that is how you build broader coalitions. Don't make your Republican friends or your conservative leaning friends feel like they need to join the left to fight for the Republic, right? I spent a lot of time talking to conservative audiences and I don't know how many I get through to, but trying to make the case about why, even if you are a conservative, a Republican, even if you're a populist Republican who likes a lot of what Trump stands for, you ought to be concerned about these things. And it's not going to work out well for you or any of us in the long run if we burn down our constitutional order. And I think people can be receptive to those messages. People are kind of stuck in their teams. To the best you can, give someone room to be with you without forcing them to abandon their loyalties or their communities that they are maybe too strongly wed to. Another small thing is because I hear this a lot. Thank Republicans when they do the right thing. I mean, I talk to Republican congressmen and staffers on the Hill, senators, who few are profiles encouraged, but every now and again they do the right thing when it matters, right? Ed Martin is not a U.S. attorney because Republican senators said no. And I hear from these folks and they say, when we do the right thing, we never get anything for it. People yell at us all the time. We do the right thing. Nobody notices except maybe Trump people who just yell at us more. So, write a nice note to a congressman, even if you didn't vote for them. Call their office and say thank you. Really appreciated what your boss did on this today. That would be helpful. It's a small thing, but I think it would matter. Thank you.
That is so good. Along those lines, just as a coda to that, Amanda, you do a lot of TV, and when you speak to MSNBC or CNN, oftentimes, and I do the same thing, we're preaching to the choir. What about going on the conservative stations? That's why I love when Pete Buttigieg goes on Fox. I'm going on Megyn Kelly's show tomorrow. I mean, I love trying to reach out to different audiences that don't normally hear this kind of message. Are you doing some of that with some of your media? And I know it's very hard to do so because we're stuck in our lanes.
No, I mean, I haven't been invited. It's not like you just walk into Fox. It doesn't work like that.
Well, that's true. You got to get booked, but it's you see Pete Buttigieg doing it sometimes.
A problem on that end than my end, to be honest.
Well, then you know what they need? They do need to get you on, because it's important that the voice of reason comes from a fellow Republican. That they probably would listen to you more than they'll listen to AOC going on their network. So I appreciate this excellent conversation. I'd like to take some questions. I see that Amit, thank you for posting in the chat some prescriptions on how to save democracy. I know that there was a question about, for me, and I saw with regarding Pam Bondi. I saw that earlier. It's funny. It's similar to the reaction that you were just talking about, Greg and Amanda, about when you do something you say something nice about a Republican and they'll make you eat it. So I ran against Pam Bondi in 2010 for Attorney General of Florida, and I lost and she won. And then she hired me as her drug czar to go after the pill mills. And we took down these pill mills everywhere in Florida and fought the opioid epidemic. And so when she was being nominated, and I spoke to my experience working with her in a bipartisan way. And also I try to counsel Democrats is that, well, Democrats just realize that the alternative to Pam Bondi is Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz was the original choice. That's the guy who burned the place down. And the alternative to Pam Bondi is not Sally Yates. And so we need to pick our battles. Now, I knew I would be in disagreement with things that she's done because we've always had different politics and ideologies. But I think it's important to remember what was said and not to tarnish someone forever because they wrote an article, for example, like your friend, about supporting George W. Bush, or you worked for Senator Cruz, or any of these things, because the real world is complicated. And if you're going to be a big tent, you're just not going to be, very few people are going to pass that purity test. So that's my take on that situation. I think there were some other questions coming in. Oh, another resource. Great. Amanda, thank you. And I apologize for calling it by the wrong word. I was saying project democracy. It's protect democracy.
It happens all the time. Don't worry about it.
Well, the reason for that is that I'm 54 years old and my eyes are aging fast, and I just saw that T as a J. So
all good. As long as people subscribe to, if you can keep it, our newsletter, I'll put the link to that in the chat too.
Thank you. And look at this. Greg also posted a recent piece that he wrote. Excellent. Greg, you want to tell us about that?
No, I was just going into detail when I talked about a little bit about Trump's new nominee to the Third Circuit and his turn against traditional conservative lawyers for judicial appointments. And I try to make the case for why it's dangerous for everybody, from the right to the left, and why we should all care about it.
So Emile
So,
Beauvais,
I would be remiss if I didn't mention when I'm telling people what they can do to help, that you can also join my organization, because we're a membership organization and we're always looking for new members. You don't need to be a lawyer. I will drop the link to that in the chat too.
thank you. Yeah, yes, please. I think that's a great way to help save our democracies, to get involved with your organizations. And Jim, I'm going to turn over to you and Karen, to see if you have some additional questions that you'd like to throw to the panel.
Actually, Bill Petrarca has been collecting the questions, and so he's ready to go with you, Dave.
All right,
Yeah.
Bill.
Okay, I've got a couple good ones here. First off, your panel talked about being at a 10 for a quote coup, but how do we turn this around if we're at a 10, and are we sleepwalking into autocracy?
Wow. Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are sleepwalking to autocracy. I think that is a certainty when you look at the indicators. And the key right now, I mean, it's public opposition. I mean, as long as we have elections, we have to use them. We have a long way to go, but to me, it's about finding a way to make our country reaffirm our core commitment to constitutional principles that have made our country the most successful one in the history of the world. Like, that is an exciting thing to do. It's difficult, but I don't think, I'm optimistic. As long as we have tools to use, I think Americans are going to use them. I never thought we would be in this situation. I never thought Donald Trump would be reelected after January 6th. It's very hard for me to accept that. And also the fact that it's not just Trump, it's an apparatus around him, because he doesn't do it alone. And so if we can find a way to just rediscover and celebrate again what makes our country so great, I think we can get there. But it's going to take a lot of work. I think it's going to take new and creative coalitions and arguments and engaging civic society in a way that they haven't had to do before. I mean, we really have to talk to the business community and say, like, what do you think is going to happen if you can't look to the courts to regulate your businesses in a fair and free way? Obviously, like a lot of big companies, they can go in and, grease the skids like a Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg's, but that's not America. And our economy is so big. The only thing, this is the other thing, you'll hear the capitalist in me. The only thing bigger than Trump right now is the U.S. economy, right? And I think that is an unspoken guardrail that does sort of temper some of his worst tendencies. But part of this new creative coalition is going to be to find a way to embrace that, right? And talk about the free market principles that maybe can constrain a president. Because we have to find things that are bigger than one man, bigger than a president. And we have it, like Amit said, at our disposal, but we just got to find new ways to use it. But that's how winning coalitions are always made. It's always the next winner, the next president that tears up the other playbook and finds new ways to win the hearts and minds. So look for the creative people, look at the people who are drawing crowds and are trying new things.
Great.
I think this leads into the next question. Is the panel worried about Trump trying to stop the 2026 elections?
Not 26, 2028.
All right, talk about that.
I mean, this is always an autocratic endgame. The authoritarians don't consolidate all this power to give it up willingly, just because maybe the Constitution says he can't run for another term. And I'm not saying that Donald Trump would ignore all that and run for another term, but I think it's extremely likely that if there is not a successful, meaningful, broad tent opposition coalition that rises up in the next 2 years, that he would be able to play kingmaker and install some kind of figurehead leader. I think that's a very possible outcome. And so, like, is there a distinction between Donald Trump running for a third term and MAGA effectively entrenching power and becoming impossible to remove? Sure, because then you can tilt elections, the things that he was talking about playing with at the end of 2020 to tilt elections his way, or his coalition's way in a 2028 scenario, I think is more of my concern perhaps than what happens in 26.
Amanda, what in particular do you think he would do to tilt the election his way? Whereas parties,
I think there was a lot of things tested in 2020. I mean, talking about accusations of fraud that we saw in 2020, going to the courts, maybe getting a sympathetic judge, using the military to seize voting machines, rerun elections so it goes his way. I mean, I'm not just fantasizing about these things. These are things that were explored in 2020 that just weren't successful because they didn't have the people around him. And when that didn't work, a mob was sent to the Capitol to try to change the results. And so, like, can that happen in other places? I think a rational person has to seriously contemplate those scenarios. I mean, how can you not? Okay, let's say there's a 1% chance. That's still pretty high, right? When you're talking about the most powerful office in the world, 1% is too high, and it's higher than that.
Yeah,
Bill?
and I think people draw some comfort, maybe reasonably, that the president's of an age where he can only be around so much longer. But I think it's not just about him. There are destructive people and forces around him, and maybe some of them are more destructive. I mean, I think that Amanda, you were right before when you said that Trump would rather not defy a court order. I think there are people in his circle that would love to, if the circumstances were right. There are people in his circle who want to break the judiciary rather than just find a way to work through it or to slowly corrupt it. There are sort of intellectuals in the new right who are just frankly anti-constitutional, who believe, and I find myself at meetings of conservative lawyers debating with them where they'll say things like, we need to realize we're in a post-legal order or in a post-constitutional order. I think it was JD Vance who was on a podcast years ago talking about how he talked about crossing the Rubicon before, and saying that we need to recognize we're in a late Roman Republic period. I mean, the idea is that the Republic is so corrupt, we need a strong man to come in and set things right. And those forces are out there whenever the president's term in office or political career comes to a close. So I'd be very worried that those people are anywhere close to the levers of power.
Right. Bill, you got another question?
I do. Somebody has asked about DeSantis putting together 2 camps to house as many as 5,000 detainees to ship to other countries, and wanted to know what the panel's opinion about that. Is it fair? Is it legal?
I mean, I guess I should admit now I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak to the legalities of what a state governor can do. But I mean, it's concerning. I mean, and this is sort of the trickle-down effect of what Trump is doing and how it empowers other people to take these kind of unprecedented actions. Again, like, my big question when it comes to all of this, like, especially when it comes to immigration enforcement, what is the justification for this? Is Florida in such a state of crisis right now that even something like this is even on the table? I mean, to me, that says something about how terribly he must be running his state. And so, the way that Trump is sort of just plowed by, sort of proving the case, and I'm not saying this kind of action would ever be justified, but they don't even bother to prove, like, to present the evidence of, like, we have this kind of problem, it's impacting these things. They just blow right by it and get to the end game. And that's one of the things that I think is really concerning, especially, you talk about what's happening around, like, there's no attempt to even build consensus. It's just, we're going to do it. If you ask questions, you're not patriotic, you are the enemy, and we're going to steamroll you. And now we're talking about alligator Alcatraz. I mean, this is the absurdity of how these things are marketed, for lack of a better term, or sold, really covers up how dangerous it is. In the absurdity, when we talk about, like, how authoritarians take power in other countries, I think how the absurdity cloaks authoritarianism in America is a distinctly unique thing that happens here that I think calls for a lot more awareness.
Yeah, and I think this is also, immigration is it's a tough issue for lots of people in lots of ways. But this is also an area where it's useful to try to break apart some of the policy issues, which can be concerning, and the legal ones, because they're stealing a lot of bases, right? I mean, they want to say, look, the government probably can run a pretty aggressive deportation program of people who are illegally present in the United States. That's not the same thing as saying you could disappear people off the streets and put them in a gulag in El Salvador without the opportunity to contest their detention and removal before court. And the defenders of the administration want to say that their opponents are don't want them to deport criminal aliens. But I suppose just we're supposed to take their word that people are criminal aliens. I mean, this is the same administration that tells us that tens of millions of people are accidentally receiving Social Security, but it can't possibly be the case that the government can make a mistake in one detention or removal. And of course, they're not just deporting some of these people, they're putting them in a terrible prison for terrorists, not just returning them to their home country. And like this, so there's really disturbing legal issues there that they're trying to bury in a policy debate. And it's hard to untangle because it doesn't mean the policy isn't concerning on its own, but they are separate conversations. I think we have to try to be mindful about how we engage in them.
There was a time when conservatives used to be skeptical of big, expansive claims from big government.
Yeah.
I'm still stuck there.
Conservatives love big government when they're in control of big government. They love activist judges when the judges are ruling their way. Yeah.
Not us, Dave.
Yeah.
Not you.
Careful.
Sorry, not everyone. Not everyone. Sure.
So one last question, then we'll if Jim wants to, we can open it up to the audience. It goes back to where we started and has to do with the Supreme Court. There are several questions about the fact that the Supreme Court seems to be ignoring precedent, and specifically the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Any response to that?
I mean, I'm going to defend it, but I feel like
Yeah,
I should leave it to the Solicitor General, who is the better lawyer than I am. But look, this is one of those, I mean, precedent is a general concept that people have a variety of opinions on. And, you hear the same people who think Roe versus Wade was an abomination because Dobbs was an abomination because it reversed Roe, celebrate a variety of civil rights decisions that reversed other cases. I mean, there are times to reverse precedent. And it's always been my view that Roe versus Wade was a particularly egregiously reasoned opinion that took a political decision out of the process and imposed the court's will. I think it's been criticized by the left for a long time too, at least academically. So I don't think that we've seen some sort of widespread departure from honoring precedent in the court. I don't think the stats bear that out. You see instances of it happening on cases that shouldn't surprise people too much. So that's my view on that. I don't know if Amit wants to educate us further.
No, I mean, I guess the one thing I would say is I think that reasonable people can disagree about questions like Dobbs. And that's an important debate, and it's one that's worth having. But what exercises me right now the most, what I'm most concerned about is, what Amanda called before, just do we really still have this commitment to underlying principles of American democracy and the rule of law? And I think you can have the debate that we're talking about with Roe v. Wade and Dobbs. You can have reasonable people on both sides of that. And what we really need to focus on right now, in my view, is coming together on things that reasonable people should not disagree about. And that's the type of stuff that we've been talking about. Can you pluck someone off the street and whisk them away to a foreign prison without any kind of process whatsoever? Reasonable people should not disagree about that. Should we have domestic deployments of the military during a time of peace and even over the objection of local and state law enforcement authorities? I think reasonable people should not disagree about that. That's a danger. And my focus is on that rather than things that kind of divide us.
Okay, last question. We have two political parties in our system, and it's to their financial advantage to create conflict. How can people come together? How can citizens come together without a feeling that they're abandoning their principles?
I would say when two parties are disagreeing, I view that as competition in the best scenario and not conflict. There's inherent conflict in politics. That is what it is about. The trick is, how do we resolve those conflicts in a peaceful manner where we agree upon an outcome and respect it. Like that is how we do good politics. That's how we do democracy, right? Like we agree to play by the rules of the game, like the abortion discussion. That is sort of a policy debate. We are going to resolve these differences within a court system. And then we can talk about why they're poorly reasoned and why we like them and why we don't like them. But we're going to respect the outcome and maybe go to court again another day with another case on it. That is what the political system is about. There is an inherent conflict there. But how do you do that and not resort to violence? That's what January 6th is about, right? Not respecting the outcome of election. If you don't have people who respect the outcome of election, you don't have a democracy. That is really what it's all about. And so I don't shy away from the conflict, and I don't think we should. Democracy is messy with a lot of disagreements, but we have to disagree in a way that respects each other and where we respect outcomes and live to do it again another day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thanks,
That's-
everybody.
That was really well said.
It is well
Very
said.
good.
When Floridians for Democracy was formed, we recognized that there were many people that their focus may be racial justice, the environment, reproductive rights, etc. But if we lose democracy, we can't debate those issues. We can't negotiate. We can't come together. And I think that's what drew us together for this program tonight. A month from now, when we have Who is an American? Birthright Citizenship on the brink. These are issues that are critical so that we can get to what Amanda just so articulately said. And the panel, we're so honored to have you this evening.